Welcome back to another episode of Out Loud Geek, where we discuss news and views about pop culture, science fiction, fantasy, food, cooking, the outdoors, and more. Welcome back to the newest episode of Who Will Be the Biggest Flop? This is part 5, and it's been another absolutely wild week at the box office. One of our 6 previous contestants, Fast X, has effectively dropped out of the running as it is no longer playing at the box office. So its numbers from last week's episode now stand as its final box office numbers. But fear not, because we have a new 6th contestant. So please give a warm welcome to our newest contestant vying to earn the coveted Biggest Flop title. The entry from Paramount Pictures, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1, starring Tom Cruise. Unlike Tom Cruise's previous movie from last year, the extremely successful Top Gun Maverick, his newest Mission Impossible movie may not break even. The movie underperformed domestically for its opening weekend box office, only earning $56.2 million. Which, when combined with the box office it earned starting late Tuesday night, that brought its current domestic total up to $80 million, which is definitely not that impressive. Internationally, the movie has a combined opening weekend of $155 million to give Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 a current global gross box office total of $235 million. Now, while that may sound like an impressive number, it's actually not for one very simple reason. The production budget for this 7th Mission Impossible movie has been reported to be $290 million, which is almost as bloated as the production budget for LucasFilm's Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction. And guess what? As shown in this chart, that $290 million production budget is the largest for the entire Mission Impossible franchise. And you know what that means. Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 also has a huge estimated break-even point range. By multiplying that $290 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 to calculate a mid and upper range estimated break-even point range, we get values of $725 million and $870 million, respectively, to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves, as well as the additional costs of marketing the movie and other miscellaneous costs that the studio pays above and beyond the production budget. And if we look at this chart, by comparing it with the previous 6 movies in the Mission Impossible franchise, we can see how much this is going to impact the ability of Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 to be able to break even. While the red trend line may look good from an historic perspective, the movie's current domestic share and lower than expected opening weekend box office is not. The franchise has an overall average weekly drop in box office of 32.69% and a standard deviation of 4.18%, if we ignore the anomalously low average weekly drop for the 4th movie in the franchise, Mission Impossible Ghost Protocol. The franchise also has an overall average domestic share of 33.1%, with a standard deviation of 5.23%. So if we treat the movie's current domestic box office earnings as its opening weekend box office and project that forward using average weekly drops of 36.87%, 32.69%, and 28.51%, which are the franchise overall average weekly drop and one standard deviation above and below, we get possible final domestic values ranging from $217 million, $244.6 million, and $280.3 million. Then, by dividing those values by the franchise average domestic share of 33.1% and one standard deviation above and below, we get this following chart, which shows that the movie's potential final global box office range is currently rather wide, from a low of $566 million to a high of around $1,006 million. And as you can see in this chart, I have included both the mid-range and upper range estimated break-even points of $725 million and $870 million. And remember what I said earlier? The movie's current domestic share is sitting at 34.04%, which is on the right-hand side of the chart, which is well below that estimated break-even point range. Now, since we don't yet currently know where the movie's average weekly drop is going to go or how much the domestic share may change in the coming weeks, right now, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 could potentially lose anywhere from $0 to around $304 million in global gross box office revenue. This means, after dividing that range by 2, that Paramount Pictures could lose anywhere from $0 to around $152 million on this movie. Certainly, since there's still a chance that the movie could break even, it could potentially be disqualified from Who Will Be the Biggest Flop, but until that happens, Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 is currently sitting in first place for the coveted title. And that brings us to our second contestant, which dropped way down into fourth place in this weekend's domestic box office. So let's have a warm welcome for Kathleen Kennedy's awful entry from Disney and Lucasfilm, Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, starring an 81-year-old Harrison Ford. Dropping into fourth place was a huge drop for any Indiana Jones movie, especially in its third weekend at the box office. But what makes this even more humiliating for Kathleen Kennedy's Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction is that it fell behind a movie that only has a $14.5 million production budget, Sound of Freedom, which probably also took potential domestic box office away from Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1. Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction only took in another $12 million domestically, which was a third weekend drop of 54.72%, which was nearly the same as its second weekend drop of 55%. When combined with what the movie earned during the weekdays, its overall weekly drop was 19.93% for a current total domestic box office of $145.4 million. Internationally, the movie managed to earn another $30.3 million to bring its international box office total up to $157 million. Globally, the movie earned another $54.5 million to bring its current global gross box office up to $302.4 million. Given that the movie now has an overall average weekly drop of 31.56%, using that to project forward along with one standard deviation above and below, and 2 standard deviations above, yields an updated range of final global gross box office of $400.4 million to $432.2 million, which is an even narrower range than last week's projections. Since the movie's break-even point range is between $736.8 million to $884.1 million, which is attained by multiplying the movie's bloated production budget of $294.7 million by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, the movie currently stands to lose somewhere between $304.5 million to $483.7 million in global gross box office revenue, and that's slightly higher than last week's projected losses. Dividing that range by 2 yields an updated possible range of losses for the movie of $152.3 million to $241.8 million for Disney and Lucasfilm, which places Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction back into first place as it was last week and the week before. This moves Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 into second place, and since its potential losses are so large, I don't plan on keeping it in last place, even though it could potentially break even. That brings us to our third contestant. So let's have a warm welcome for the entry from Disney Pixar, the animated movie Elemental. The movie earned another $8.7 million domestically to bring its domestic box office total up to $125.3 million. Internationally, the movie earned another $43.7 million, which was a slight decline over last week, to bring its international box office up to $186.4 million. Globally, the movie earned another $59.8 million, which was a decline of 8.16%, to bring its current global box office total up to $311.7 million. Projecting forward, using the overall Pixar movie average weekly drop of 28.4%, and one standard deviation above and below, yields a possible final global gross box office range of $408.9 million to $559.6 million, which means that the likelihood of the movie breaking even is continuing to rise since its estimated break-even point is $500 million, which is obtained by multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5. This means that the movie now stands to lose anywhere from $0 to $91.91 million in global gross box office revenue, which, when divided by 2, means that Disney Pixar may lose anywhere from $0 to $45.6 million. Its chances of being disqualified are rising since its chances of breaking even are also increasing. Given how much money the movie has already earned and how little the studio now stands to lose, it's very unlikely that Elemental will have a chance of winning the coveted biggest flop title. So next week may be its final appearance on who will be the biggest flop. Currently, Elemental sits in last place. This brings us to our fourth contestant. So let's have a warm welcome for the entry from Paramount Pictures and Hasbro, Transformers: Rise of the Beasts. The movie earned another $3.4 million at the domestic box office to bring its current domestic total up to $152.8 million. It also earned another $11.9 million internationally to bring its total international box office up to $268.2 million. So its global box office increased by $17.9 million to bring its current global gross box office revenue up to $421 million. Currently, its individual weekly drops have an overall average of 36.02%. So projecting forward by also taking into account the average weekly drops that are up to one standard deviation away based on the previous 6 Transformers movies, yields a projected final global box office range of $443.3 million to $467.5 million. So given that the movie's estimated break-even point ranges between $500 million to $600 million, which is based on multiplying the movie's $200 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, we get a potential range of global gross box office loss of $32.4 million to $156.7 million. When we divide that range by 2, we get a potential loss for the studios of $16.2 million to $78.3 million, which places Transformers: Rise of the Beasts currently into 3rd place, ahead of Elemental and behind Mission: Impossible – Dead Reckoning Part 1, which currently sits in 2nd place. Now let's welcome our 5th contestant, which came in 10th place in this weekend's domestic box office, Disney's live-action race swap remake of The Little Mermaid. The movie earned another $3.5 million at the domestic box office, bringing its current domestic total up to $289 million. Internationally, there was no reported increase in box office, so it would appear that The Little Mermaid has earned as much as it possibly can from overseas, which is $252.8 million. So globally, the movie only earned another $4.6 million since last week, bringing its current global gross box office total up to $546.7 million. Naturally, the loss of additional international box office has severely curtailed the projected final global gross box office for The Little Mermaid, which, based on the updated overall average weekly drop in global box office of 38.41%, the movie will likely top out at around $554 million, which is a significant drop from last week's projection. So based on the movie's break-even point of $780 million, which is calculated by adding the movie's $250 million production budget and the $140 million spent by Disney to market the movie, yields a total cost of $390 million, which then gets multiplied by 2 to account for the 50% of gross ticket sales that movie theaters keep for themselves. Thus, the movie's total global gross box office loss will probably be around $226 million. When we divide that by 2, Disney's net loss on The Little Mermaid is currently projected to be around $113 million, which puts the movie into 3rd place behind Mission: Impossible – Dead Reckoning Part 1 and ahead of Transformers: Rise of the Beasts, which now falls to 4th place, with Elemental coming in last place. And that brings us to our 6th and final contestant, based on it coming in 13th place at this weekend's domestic box office. So let's have a warm welcome for the entry from Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios, the increasingly underperforming superhero movie The Flash, starring everyone's favorite wackadoodle actor Ezra Miller. Its domestic box office earning for its 5th weekend in release were only $720,000, which brought the movie's total domestic box office to $106.8 million. Internationally, the movie only earned another $400,000 to bring its current international box office total to $156.8 million. Globally, the movie earned another $2 million to bring its current total global box office up to around $263.6 million. So based on a current average weekly drop of 58.26%, I am currently projecting that the final global gross box office for The Flash will likely be around $265.1 million. Given the movie's estimated break-even point range of $550 million to $660 million, which is based on multiplying its $220 million production budget by 2.5 and 3.0 respectively, the current projected global gross box office loss for the movie ranges between $284.9 million and $394.9 million. Dividing that range by 2 yields a range of possible loss for Warner Bros. Discovery and DC Studios of $142.5 million to $197.5 million. This means that The Flash retakes second place for the coveted Biggest Flop prize, immediately behind Indiana Jones and the Dildo of Destruction, with Mission Impossible Dead Reckoning Part 1 moving into third place, The Little Mermaid moving into fourth place, Transformers Rise of the Beasts moving into fifth place, and Elemental moving into sixth place. Be sure to tune in next week to see how the competition continues for who will be the biggest flop. Thanks for watching today, and a huge thanks to everyone who has subscribed to our channel. We appreciate your support. If you enjoyed this video, please press the like button, and please feel free to share a comment. If you'd like to help support this channel, please press the red subscribe button, and please press the bell to receive notifications for new content. You can also find us on Facebook, Instagram, Threads, and Twitter by clicking on the links in the description. Until next time, this is Out Loud Geek.